The North Atlantic, March 1943. The sea was black glass under a pale moon, calm enough to show the faint white trail of a torpedo as it cut through the waves. Aboard U-653, Captain Lieutenant Franz Heller watched through the periscope as his shot closed in on the convoy. The merchant ship loomed in the crosshairs, a fat, slow freighter, a perfect kill. He waited for the impact flash. 5 seconds, 10, 20, nothing. The wake veered slightly, wobbling in the current, and vanished into the dark. A dull hiss followed, not the detonation he expected, but the faint rumble of depth charges far off to starboard. His first officer stared at him in confusion. "A dud again, Herr Captain?" Heller said nothing. He lowered the periscope and exhaled. This was the third torpedo that week to misfire, the third time their prey had slipped away. He told himself it was bad luck, faulty detonators, maybe a manufacturing defect. But deep down, he knew something had changed. That night, as the U-boat sank back into the depths, the men whispered in their bunks. They had heard stories. Other boats in the wolf pack missing easy kills, entire convoys vanishing before they could even be tracked. And the strangest part, the British seemed to know where they were. Aircraft appeared out of nowhere, diving through cloud and darkness with uncanny precision. "They can smell us," one of the crew said. The men laughed nervously, but no one disagreed. For years, the Atlantic had been the U-boat's domain, a hunter's ocean. Now it was turning into a trap. By spring, the pattern was undeniable. Convoys were no longer blind sheep wandering across the sea. They moved with purpose, guarded by destroyers that seemed to anticipate every ambush. U-boats that once prowled undetected were being bombed at periscope depth, as if the enemy could see through the water itself. At first, Berlin blamed chance. Then spies began reporting rumors from British coastal bases, whispers of a new detection system mounted on aircraft, one that could locate submarines even when submerged. The code name was unclear. The British called it the Magnetic Eye. The physics behind it were almost unbelievable. Every submarine, no matter how silent, carried within it tons of ferromagnetic steel. Even buried beneath meters of seawater, that mass disturbed the Earth's magnetic field ever so slightly. With sensitive enough instruments, one could measure that disturbance, the subtle dip, the magnetic anomaly. By late 1942, the Americans had perfected it, the Magnetic Anomaly Detector, or MAD. Mounted on long-range patrol aircraft like the PBY Catalina and the B-24 Liberator, it could sense a submerged submarine within a few hundred meters. For a U-boat crew relying on stealth, it was the beginning of the end. In the Black Ocean, silence had once meant safety. Now, even the Earth's own magnetism had turned against them. At the Kriegsmarine headquarters in Paris, Admiral Karl Dönitz read the after-action reports with growing despair. One in particular stood out, a survivor's testimony from U-200. The boat had surfaced briefly at night to recharge batteries when a Liberator appeared out of the clouds, diving straight toward them without radar contact, dropping depth charges that bracketed them perfectly. "No searchlight, no sonar," the captain had written. "They came directly to our position, as if led by a line drawn on the sea." Dönitz circled the sentence in red pencil. "Impossible," he muttered, "unless the English have learned to read the compass itself." His staff exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young scientist from Kiel, finally spoke. "Herr Admiral, the British have universities working for their navy, physicists. Perhaps they have found a way to use the magnetic field." Dönitz's face darkened. Physicists do not win wars. Men do. But the words sounded hollow. While the German command debated theories, the Allies refined practice. The new anti-submarine strategy was a synthesis of technologies: radar to track surfaced U-boats at night, HF-DF to intercept their radio messages, and MAD to pinpoint them underwater. It was the culmination of invisible senses converging into a single, lethal awareness. A liberator on patrol near the Azores might detect a faint blip on radar, a periscope wake, a conning tower breaking the surface. The pilot would dive, dropping flares and marking the spot. As the submarine crash-dived, the aircraft's tail boom swung over the water, the MAD sensor humming. In the cockpit, a needle flicked, then quivered violently, the unmistakable pull of steel beneath the waves. "Contact! Bearing 178! Depth 50 meters!" Seconds later, depth charges plunged into the ocean, detonating in perfect symmetry. Oil and debris surfaced soon after. The crews called it witchcraft, though the engineers back at the labs in California and London knew better. It was pure physics, the Earth itself whispering the position of its intruders. By the end of 1943, the Atlantic had changed from a hunting ground to a graveyard. U-boat losses doubled, then tripled. Submarines that had once crossed the ocean unseen now vanished without ever firing a shot. Entire wolf packs went silent. Heller's U-653 survived longer than most, slipping through Allied patrol zones by luck more than skill. But even he began to notice strange coincidences. Every time they surfaced to send a radio message, a plane appeared within hours. When they lay silent at periscope depth, depth charges still found them. He began ordering deeper dives, longer silences, fewer transmissions. The men grew pale and hollow-eyed, trapped between suffocation and fear. One night, as they cruised 200 miles west of Ireland, a sonar ping echoed faintly through the hull, then another, higher in pitch. "Destroyer," the soundman whispered. The crew froze. Then came the steady drone of aircraft engines above. The first depth charge hit at 01:14. The lights flickered, gauges shattered. The captain shouted for damage reports. The second explosion was closer. Pipes burst, the submarine tilted, and then, from the sound room, the terrified voice of the operator. "They're dropping perfectly, like they can see us." No one answered. They all knew it was true. The next morning, the ocean was calm again, but the calm no longer meant safety. From the surface, nothing betrayed the invisible war beneath. The sky was clear, the sea endless, the horizon a perfect circle of blue. Yet every wave hid sensors, every cloud carried eyes. By 1944, the Atlantic had become the most surveilled battlefield in human history. British and American scientists had turned the planet itself into a detection grid. Radar to find the surfaced U-boats, sonar to hear them underwater, and the Magnetic Anomaly Detector to sense them even when silent. The Germans had built steel wolves. The Allies had built an ecosystem of awareness. In a small room at the Anti-Submarine Development Unit in Miami, engineers plotted the results. Red dots, U-boat positions confirmed by MAD-equipped aircraft, spanned the map like constellations. The new data told a grim story. 7 out of 10 submarines detected by magnetics never returned. One officer studying the charts remarked, "They used to call it the Gray Ocean. It's black now. Black with wrecks." The shift had happened quietly. Just 2 years earlier, convoys had been slaughtered across the North Atlantic, their burning hulls lighting the night. But by mid-1944, the hunters were the hunted. For the German crews, it was a slow-motion nightmare. They no longer trusted the sea, or even their instruments. Compass needles twitched erratically when Allied planes flew overhead, a phantom pull from the magnetic sensors above. They would dive deep, shut off engines, and drift, listening for the sound of propellers they could not see. Then came the faint buzz, the sound of the aircraft's mad boom sweeping directly overhead, and seconds later, the sea erupted. On U-653, Franz Heller learned to tell the difference between the dull boom of random depth charges and the tight, deliberate pattern of a guided hunt. He could feel it in his bones. They know exactly where we are. His final entry in the logbook, recovered from wreckage later, was just 6 words. The sea itself betrays us now. In London, the men who had built those magnetic detectors were reading their own reports with a mixture of pride and unease. The physicists from the telecommunications research establishment knew exactly what they had unleashed. Each kill on paper was not a ship, but a pulse, a ripple of magnetism turned into death. One scientist, John Renshaw, described the moment of realization in his diary. "We have made the Earth itself participate in war. It tells us where the metal hides." For the engineers, it was a triumph of physics. For the sailors, it was an invisible doom. After the war, Allied recovery teams began pulling up the twisted wrecks from the deep. Many were found with torpedo tubes still loaded, engines intact, boats that had been ambushed before they could even fight. Inside some, the logbooks ended mid-sentence. The war had simply erased them. Historians later called it the War of Equations. No duel of aces, no clash of fleets, just men pitted against math. The submarine, symbol of stealth and independence, had been undone by something no periscope could detect: the quiet hum of scientific inevitability. When Franz Heller's name appeared on the list of missing in 1944, his wife received a single letter forwarded from his command. It contained a short passage he had written weeks earlier. "The enemy no longer hunts with eyes or ears. They hunt with understanding. When a man fights against knowledge, he fights against the future itself." She never remarried. Years later, in 1953, the U.S. Navy unveiled a new navigation system based on the same magnetic principles. Aircraft could now traverse oceans without compasses, guided by the same faint distortions in Earth's field that had once doomed the submarines. The technology had evolved beyond war, but its origins were still buried beneath the waves. In time, the story of the magnetic detector faded into the background of history. The headlines remembered radar, sonar, code breaking, but not this quiet revolution that had turned nature into an ally. Only a few veterans, men who had watched the needle quiver moments before the sea exploded, remembered what it felt like to be found by something they could not see. Today, when a patrol plane crosses the Atlantic using magnetic navigation, its sensors trace the same patterns that once hunted submarines. The instruments no longer listen for steel hulls. They listen for guidance, for direction, for peace. But the physics remains unchanged. The Earth still speaks in magnetism, still reveals the invisible to those who listen. And somewhere in the deep, the wrecks of the U-boats rest quietly. Iron bones of an empire that believed it could hide in the dark. The ocean keeps their secret. The planet remembers their outline, and the magnetic field that betrayed them continues to hum, steady and eternal, across the waves,